So here's something interesting. I'm in Istanbul, Turkey. It's my first time here. When I got here to the airport, I had to figure out firstly, how do I get from A to B? So my first thought is obviously get yourself an Uber or some form of an e-hailing app. So I go to the info desk and I say to them, guys, where can I grab an Uber of some sort? And they're like, no Uber, taxi. So then I think to myself, is this one of those things where they're like, no, you should definitely take an airport taxi and not like an Uber because there's some weirdness going on. So I whip out my Uber app and then I'm checking. I'm like, okay, cool. Let me figure out where I can go. All of the Ubers on the Uber app are yellow, like taxis. So I'm like, that's rather strange. But anyways, I try to figure out where I can grab one. Eventually I fail and I have to take an airport taxi. But then I started thinking, why were all those Ubers in the Uber app yellow like taxis? And what the hell is going on in Istanbul with Uber and taxi? So I started digging. When Uber first launched in Istanbul in 2014, it faced heavy opposition from the city's traditional taxi industry. For a few years, Uber was not actually allowed to legally operate here following a court case. Despite these challenges, as of 2021, Uber has now managed to establish a presence in the Turkish market. But it wasn't easy. They had to cut deals with the taxi cartels. For the longest time, authorities in Istanbul and the influential Cab Owners Association were, and to some degree still are, engaged in a taxi turf war of their own, even before Uber arrived. What makes it even more difficult is that it's not easy being a taxi driver in Istanbul. This is a city that's spread across 2 continents and 3 waterways. In contrast to drivers in other major cities, a majority of Istanbul's 50,000 taxi drivers hire 17,000 plus licensed automobiles that are used as taxis, and they work them while in shifts. Before the pandemic, monthly taxi rent was around 9,000 Turkish lira, 22,000 rand, according to official numbers. After the pandemic came down, it now stands at around 10,000 rand. The other thing is that the number of yellow taxis in Istanbul hasn't changed since 1991, when authorities auctioned off taxi number plates for the last time, even as Istanbul's population was increasing. Efforts to put more taxis on the roads have been met with protests by other cab drivers. In the 1990s, when the current Turkish president Recep Tayyip Erdogan served as mayor of this very city, there were roughly 8 million people living in Istanbul. The population has since increased to 16 million people, but there's still the same number of available taxi licenses. The result of this is that a wealthy cartel of license holders, and if you're South African, you need to read this as taxi bosses, has been formed as a result of an increase in demand and the allure of making profits from owning these licenses. Like routes in South Africa, the cost of a license varies, but around 2020, this license cost around 2.6 million lira, around 1.5 to 1.8 million rand. But since currencies have devalued further, it could even be more right now. Yellow taxi drivers who had long complained about Uber eating into their business and profits around 2018 decided to take to the streets. Yellow taxi drivers and rival pirate outfits have often engaged in violent altercations right here in Istanbul, and some of these have turned lethal when knives and weapons are involved. Also, the historical customer service of taxis in Turkey has not been known for their top-tier service. For years, patrons who were unfortunate enough to locate a taxi cab found that the ride frequently was not pleasant. Persistent issues including sexual harassment were often reported: racism, overcharging, rudeness, and reckless driving. Actually, about that overcharging, even I almost fell victim to it one time. I requested a ride. The driver messaged me before even arriving. He told me it was going to be 20 euro. And I told him, Habibi, that doesn't make sense. Uber's already costed the trip. He then told me to stuff off and he cancelled. That trip ended up being 140 rand. He wanted to charge me 400 plus rand. It's not really great if you're a tourist and you have to do a lot of this bargaining. With a record 43,000 complaints regarding taxi driver behavior already this year, the Istanbul municipality has stepped up its efforts to modernize the taxi industry in the city. There are, however, other alternatives to get around, from apps like B-Taxi, which allows users to hail taxis like they would with an Uber. The app is user-friendly and has a similar interface to Uber even. The app offers cash or credit card payment options. It's also a good idea to always carry cash when you're around Istanbul, just in case your credit card doesn't work for some or other reason. Turkey has a great public transport network that includes buses, metros, trams, and even trains. In Turkey, public transport is dependable, inexpensive, and also quite safe. There are more than 100 distinct bus routes that run all around Istanbul. An Istanbul card is a card that you can also load cash onto and use at various public transportation systems in and around the city. The real crux of all of this is that what I noted here in Istanbul is that yellow taxis using Uber are here to stay. The taxi bosses got their way. In 2021, Uber relaunched its service here in Turkey with a slight twist. it had agreed, likely under duress, to work with the taxis. Likely with the same cabbies who were behind the campaign to force the ride-hailing giant out of the market in 2019. An Istanbul court overturned the ban of Uber, and there were mixed reactions from even the yellow taxi drivers. But interestingly enough, in all of this, the real owners of the taxi cabs never commented publicly, and new cabs still haven't gotten on the road here. It kind of feels like Uber was hustled and just became the default app for the same taxi cartel here in Istanbul. The service didn't necessarily change, nor will it likely. But yeah, it works and you get there. And the fare calculator makes life easy for you to not have to negotiate every time you want to get from somewhere to somewhere else. Also, in South African terms, it's quite reasonable, around 90 to 180 Rand max to get around most of the European part of the city. Let me know if you have any Istanbul taxi Uber stories of your own, or even stories from any other major city. For all its faults, Uber really does make traveling a whole lot more convenient in Istanbul and everywhere else. Many thanks for watching this video until this point. Maybe check out one of the other videos and get a better understanding around the South African, the SADC, and the African perspective on key topics and really interesting data-driven stories. Cheers.